Cool. Mr. Tom Foxley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, mate. I'm really looking forward to this conversation happening for the few weeks that we've had it booked in.
Yeah, we've had it in the pipeline, but we're finally here. Really good to get you on. So normally I like to start with an introduction, but I like to get my guests to introduce themselves. So for anyone who's not familiar with Mr. Tom Foxley, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so I am a mental performance coach for freedom-seeking business owners, and basically what I help people do is create mental fitness. And mental fitness is a bit different to mental health, and we can get into that a bit later or at some point. I was formerly a Royal Marine Commando, so elite-ish aspect of the British military. I coached some very, very high-level athletes, including literally the world's best in a few different sports, including CrossFit. And I am obsessed with why do we do what we do and how do we optimize ourselves and perform at that higher percentage of our potential.
Awesome. So it sounds I've listened to you on a few other podcasts, and the term mindset came up quite a lot. And when people think of like mental performance, I think it can either scare people away or it's one of those terms that gets thrown around quite a lot in social media. There's mental, this mindset aspect being having a positive mindset, having a negative mindset. So it's a term everyone will be familiar with in terms of mindset. But I've seen you break it down into kind of three distinct areas in terms of what you do. So you've got the sort of philosophy, physiology, and then the psychological side as well. So can you just talk us through a little bit more about mindset and how you've broken it down into those areas?
Yeah, so the way I now say it, I think I used the term mindset originally because it was an easy phrase that people intuitively understood a percentage of and kind of got it to begin with. But as I've evolved, I've realized it's a bit more than the mindset that we take to an experience and we show up with. So I speak in terms of mental fitness now. And our fitness is our ability to execute a task or to achieve a certain goal. And that's pretty different from mental health, which if you Google health, it's usually an absence of illness or disease. And that's a bit different. I view that as getting from like -10 to 0. And then mental fitness is going from like 0 to 100. And it's accelerating. And there's similar principles in there and there's similar practices. And some tools even work the same way and on both sides of that 0. But for me, it's about how do we get you to do the thing that you need to do? How do we get you action focused? How do you get you achieving and attaining? And to do that, how do we get you improving? How do we get you actualizing? So there's three things that essentially create our mental fitness. And we can think about these as the components or the zones of mental fitness. One of them is our resilience. Resilience is our ability to positively respond or adapt to stress. So if I have very low resilience, I encounter a stressful situation and I can either play dead, and we can talk about exactly what this means eventually, but I can either play dead or I can go into that fight or flight, hustle and grind, stress out mode. So that's the first one. We can train our resilience to maintain this point of equilibrium when we approach challenge. Feel free to jump in if you want to as well. The second one is clarity. Clarity is being able to see the situation, our path, and most importantly, ourself with clarity, clearly without a lens in the way. So this looks like typical goal setting stuff, but also looks at knowing yourself and freeing yourself from your stories. So that's the psychological aspect. The first one was physiological. And then finally, we look at the character that we're developing. And this looks like if you had your superhero version of yourself with a 10 out of 10 focus and a 10 out of 10 discipline and a 10 out of 10 compassion or awareness. Basically, what does this version of you look like? And that's applying the philosophical side of things to develop our character, to become the person that we know in the back of our mind we have the potential to become. The Germans have this phrase, the Hintergedankt. I think I'm saying that right. Basically, a thought in the back of our head that we know it's not quite clear, but it lives in the back of our mind. And that character is our Hintergedankt. It's who we think we can become. It's the version of ourselves that we compare ourselves to and go, man, I knew I could be that guy or girl. Like there's that version of me that's dying to come out. And it's the way that we surprise ourselves or disappoint ourselves when we act below our potential. So mental fitness is basically training the resilience, training our clarity, and training our character.
That's interesting to say about resilience, because I feel there's certain aspects of, if I speak personally, there's certain parts of me. I wouldn't say I'm a particularly resilient person. I've done your mental fitness assessment. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the the question I really initially had was, when you talk about resilience, do you think you can be? Do you think there's two sides to it? So, in certain aspects of my life, I would say I'm fairly resilient. So, we've been traveling before. I've been, abroad with my other half, and we basically got stuck. The flight got cancelled. All the trains were cancelled, and we were, pretty screwed, really. Um, but I don't tend to panic in situations like that. I'd say my resilience for situations, when I'm put into those situations, I'm pretty good. Whereas if I was to talk about resilience in terms of, setbacks or, personal goals and development, I would say I'm not very resilient. I would say I struggle quite a lot with this kind of self-deprecating, I'm not good enough, all that sort of stuff. So do you think that resilience can be multifaceted
Yeah,
when you talk about that one?
great question, and thanks for sharing as well. I think it's so important to frame this in terms of stories and personal ways. So you doing this is fantastic, and it's not always the most comfortable thing to do. So entirely, resilience is situational, and this is partly where these zones of mental fitness, they merge and they become wrapped up. Just like your strength can help your cardiovascular fitness, because if I'm stronger, I don't have to work so hard to put one foot in front of the other and run. So in this case, it could be that we have a story about certain areas of life where the lack of clarity can influence the resilience, or there's a physiological kind of trigger or a physical trigger. So this resilience piece is all based on this idea called polyvagal theory. The idea of that is the vagus nerve, it's the 10th cranial nerve. It means the wandering nerve. You've had a few guys on the podcast who have probably talked about the vagus nerve. It has a few functions. And in polyvagal theory, the way I look at it and interpret it for the people that I work with, and there's a few different ways to look at it in terms of trauma, but there's 3 different states that it can be in. It can be in fight or flight, like I need to get out of here. I need to change something. I need to make a difference. So you fight or you flight to get out of there. You can be in what's called your dorsal vagal shutdown. And what that means is there's a situation out there and I am so terrified by it and I'm so threatened by it that I'm going to shut down. I'm going to literally play dead. If your cat brings in a mouse and the mouse lies on the floor and plays dead, this is nervous system kicking in. It's not a conscious move. It's not going, I know I'll get this cat. It's a kick in. You literally get so stressed, so fearful, so scared that your body will shut down. And for people, this looks like burying your head in the sand. It looks like avoiding the situation. It looks like not wanting to confront it. It's the complete shutdown. And then you have, if the ventral vagal, so the vagus nerve again is optimally toned. The ventral vagal, like ventral means going forward, it means at the front. Okay, so that means we're socially engaged with the problem, we're moving forwards. Now, I bring all that up because our body is constantly scanning for threat. It's always saying, am I safe? It's a phrase called neurocepting. And it's different from perceiving the situation because we're not consciously doing it. We're neurocepting it. And that means we're looking out, or part of us is looking out and constantly scanning for threat. So linked to this, and I told you to get back here eventually. When we're looking at can I be situationally resilient? It might be that your body is neurocepting a threat in a certain environment. So I struggled in my business for a long time. I went completely broke in my first ever business within about 3 months. I tried to open a gym. I was not qualified to do it. I had no leads, I had no training, I had nothing, and apart from being a pretty good coach at the time. From then on, it took me a long time to disconnect the feeling of looking at my finances from the utter terror that I experienced and the shutdown that I'd get into. So it could be a situational thing. But if you put me in a physiological, like if you put me in Royal Marines training, I could handle it. I could go through that stress. If you put me in an argument, I can handle it. So it's a different kind of perception. And that can come back to childhood. It can be a lot of different things that links to it. It's kind of a trauma response, but without necessarily the intensity of trauma.
Okay, that's interesting. And I talked about like the little mental health fitness assessment that you have on your website. So we'll put some links in at the end of the podcast. I'll get some sort of inputs to where you direct people to go. But it, m- to put it bluntly, my scores weren't great. I I feel like it told me stuff that I knew to be true, and I'm certainly not the only one who feels this way. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there listening who feel this way as well. But I think for me, it's more of a case of I feel I'm capable of a lot more than I'm currently doing. And I think this is kind of what your business is centered around is, extracting that performance out of people and getting them to build into the character they want to be. The thing I struggle with personally is I know I'm capable of more, but it's where I can channel my efforts to do that. And how do you know if you're, moving in the right direction? And there's things in my life I've achieved which I should be more proud of, and I was proud at the time, although it's quite a fleeting sensation. And I spoke to Andrew Dace, who was a previous guest out on, and he was really drilling down into this idea of enjoying the reward of your efforts, even if you might go into a gym session, for example, and not quite achieve what you wanted to do, but you should be proud of what you did anyway because you worked and just taking that extra time. And he did it at the time when I was kind of graduating from university, and I was had this idea in my head of like enjoying the rewards. So anytime I did anything and achieved something, I'd always take a little bit longer than I thought I should, just to actually really reflect and go, actually, I'm proud of what I've done. So I guess I wanted to ask, when you start looking at things like not fulfilling your capability or those sorts of feelings, where would one start with, trying to unpack that and, the sort of initial start of getting to the point where you want to be?
Yeah, it's the first thing I'd do is actually put someone through that mental fitness assessment, or when I work with someone, there's a slightly more in-depth version of that. It's a 10-day assessment phase. So we're basically looking at, do you need to work on resilience, clarity, or character? For 90% of people, it's an even split between resilience and clarity. Some people need that character development, but honestly, most people have stories that get in their way. In terms of clarity, the hierarchy is people haven't identified a clear objective that they can get behind. There's this idea called nested goals that we can go through, and I think that would be pretty useful at some point. But all that means is there's misalignment between what they're doing and how they're trying to get there and what they want. So it looks like if they're lacking clarity, they don't know where they want to go. They don't know the path to get there, obviously, because how can you know the path to get there if you don't know where you're going and you can't see yourself clearly? So that's the clarity component. And then the resilience thing is, if you are finding yourself confronting the same challenge time after time after time and not getting any further, it's usually a resilience challenge. And the reason that is because that ventral vagal, that is called the social engagement system, that circuit is switched on and we become creative and open and willing to risk and fail. So if it's like, I can't tap into that potential, well, firstly, there's a story there. Who says so? How do we know that's true? Because there are times you 100% have. So what's the story that's getting in the way? And then we just basically drill down into, okay, what's the root cause? Because someone might say, I want to get physically fitter, but what does that mean? Well, firstly, we need to figure out where you want to get to. What does physically fitter look like for you? Does it mean deadlifting a car, or does it mean running a sub 3-hour marathon? Like, what does it mean to you? Because they're very different training protocols. So that's the first step we start with.
Okay, and then if we look at like we're talking about physical stuff there. So if you're looking at like a strength goal, I'd say that the metrics to know if you're on the right track may be quite clear cut. You may have a nice route of progression mapped out. When we're talking about the mind, how would you know if you're on the right direction? Would it be a similar sort of process?
Yeah, a beautiful question. It's something that I seem to obsess over a lot, but not many people have thought to ask themselves. So it's a really, really insightful question, not just because I agree with it, because I think it helps people. So we're always walking two paths. The path of attainment and the path of actualization. And you can imagine you got one foot on both paths. So the path of attainment, let's say that's your right foot, is what are you getting from the world? This is really important. So is it the house? Is it the partner? Is it the job? Is it the dog? Is it like, what is it? Like, what are your steps that you're trying to accrue? Is it the wage? Is it the salary? Is it the revenue for your business? Like, how are you moving forwards on that? And then let's say your left foot is in the path of actualization. Who are you becoming? Are you moving forwards? Now, what I've found is people start moving that right foot forwards, the path of attainment, over and over and over and over again. Eventually you get stuck because they're basically doing the splits. They've got the left foot dragging behind them, and that is anchored in. They can't move any further forwards because they're snapping back with that kind of that path of actualization holding them back. So firstly, I look at, well, are you moving forwards in the things that you want to move forward in? Because remember, fitness is your ability to achieve a task, is to do something, is to perform how you need to in the world. So we can look at that, and then we can ascertain, is it a skill deficit? So is there a skill that you're lacking? Like, do you not know how to market your business, or do you not know how to deadlift a barbell properly? And if that's the case, we can just work on that. But more likely, from people who work with me, it's the actualization piece. So then we look at, let me back up. First metrics, what are the key metrics of success in your chosen discipline? So that could be revenue, that could be 5K time, you tell me, and you'll know that for you. And then we can look at in the personal growth side of things. That looks like physiologically, I track things like heart rate variability with my clients. Where are you at? Are you improving your heart rate variability? Are you finding a natural band to operate in? There's some complexity around that, and we can go into that if you want to. So physiologically, I look at things like that. I look at sleep quality. I look at mood. Then I've basically got a checklist. Do you have your goals clearly written? Do you have those nested goals that I talk about clearly lined up? Have you been through your stories work that I do with people? Do you know your stories inside out? And at the end of it, you should be able to go through that mental fitness assessment, which is intentionally harsh, by the way, because I think people need to kind of realize where we're at and how much potential we have to give. It's not like everyone scores fairly low. Like, I don't score 100% on it. Like, definitely not. I'm about 70% on it. There's more I can give. So then I start to look at, like, have you basically filled in these boxes? Do you know the type of person you're meant to become? Are you always matching up? And then it's a more subjective measure, and it's a conversation.
Okay. I see. I was in the 30s for most. I was, I think 30, 30, 40. And I think it's not too far removed from what I was expecting, to be honest. So I went with an open mind, but the things I struggle with currently are probably those areas in which we touched on. Things like the goals. I've had goals in the past, but I don't know if they were more on the superficial side or if it's actually something I really, really wanted to do. And I think that's probably quite a nice little topic to move on to be honest, is the goal element, because everyone, again, it's one of those things where people say you should have some goals. It's financial goals, physical goals, whatever it may be. But when we're talking about, again, like mind, I'm currently working with a coach, just started working with a coach to, I said I'm kind of struggling at the moment and I want to build. I know for me, the physical aspect is a nice way to bridge the gap between, my body and my mind. I know if I'm feeling good physically, then the mind tends to follow, and I tend to sort of improve on that sense. But when we're talking about, the goals for our mind as well, similar question to before really, is what would that look like in terms of a mental goal? Is it that we just want to become more resilient, for example, or we want to, when someone shouts at you and puts you in a stressful situation, you are a better person at responding to that? What's the kind of, what we're talking about here when we're talking about those sorts of goals?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example, and it's pretty linked to that. One of my clients, actually about 5 of my clients that I'm working with right now, have basically realized that their character goal is assertiveness. They want to be more assertive. They're all guys, and they've all got to the situation where when things are demanded of them, or when they are confronted with a situation that they don't want to happen, they kind of roll over and they don't assert themselves over it. So they're speaking to a client who wants a certain thing, and they know they shouldn't do that, but they kind of feel obliged to people please in that way. So it may look like, okay, assertiveness, let's train that. And what you're really talking about here is the bottom rung of this thing called nested goals, or this concept called nested goals that I have. And I want you to imagine at the bottom, you've got this thing called character skills. This is the character of who you're becoming. And if you've ever played FIFA or Madden or any of those other games, you'll know that each character or each player or each whatever has a score for like shooting, 70 out of 100, passing, like 50 out of 100, endurance, 90 out of 100, and have these ratings. What we can do when we have clarity over your goals is go, what type of person do I need to become to achieve this goal? So it may be that discipline was in there. And, okay, I need to become this type of person. And I need to become more disciplined. I need to execute my task. It may be that I need to become more present. It may be that I need to become more compassionate. It may be that I need to become more aggressive. And I need to go after my goals with more aggression. But you can only do that really once you've ascertained what's driving you authentically. Because there's so many ways you could develop, just like there's so many types of physical fitness you could develop, that we need to figure out what you want from the world first. So at the bottom of the list, imagine this kind of like river, okay, that's kind of energies flowing from the top to the bottom. At the bottom is character skills. From there, we need to know the process. Okay, so the process is basically what you need to do to move you forwards. What's the process? This is when people say obsess over the process. Really, really important stuff. So your character skills is who you need to be to execute the process to the best of your ability. Above your process is your short-term goals. These might look like 7-day goals, 1-day goals, 30 days, 90 days, basically up to 90 days. This is when smart goal setting comes in. So we want challenging and specific goals at this point. Be aggressive with it, force yourself. From that, you can derive the process, and from there, you can see what character you need. Above that is your long-term goals, like kind of 3 years, 1 year from now. What do you like? What is the thing that you want to have in your life? Is it you want your business revenue to be up? Is it you want to have a team in place? Is it you want to only be working 3 hours a day? What is it? Is it you want 2 kids? Like, what's the vision? What's the exact goals, the quantifiable metrics? Now, that's kind of where most people stop. It's probably just the smart goal setting. Maybe they think about the process. Very rarely they think about who I need to become. But above that, there's 2 more tiers. And above the long-term goal setting, 3 more tiers. Above the long-term goal setting, we get our vision. Now, our vision is the emotional aspect. It's kind of the gist of what I want to achieve. It's the emotional tone. You could paint a picture of it. It's that kind of got that feeling associated with it. And the reason we have that is because logically you can set smart goals, but if they don't align with your vision, then they're meaningless to you. Above that, you have your values. Your values are the things that you want more of in your life. So for me, freedom is a big one. That's a huge one in my life. Adventure is another one. Okay, and then above that, we have a unifying purpose. Now, got all those things, those components of nested goals. If we're doing everything right, and if we've completed that exercise, so basically all of those exercises I can give people to slot into those, we find alignment, and there's a clear line. The river runs without any curves, or maybe a slight few curves in it, but like it's a straight line. And you got to imagine that's the most efficient way to get energy from the source of the river to the mouth of the river. It flows easily. Most people have bits missing, so energy pools there. It doesn't reach below that, but more common is they're misaligned. You've got this vague vision that you've kind of is someone else's vision of success you picked up from childhood. It's not really authentic to you. You've got these goals that are misaligned with your long-term goals. You got no idea of the character and the process. Well, it's so confused because there's 12 different things that you're working towards. So what we need to try and do is create alignment in that. And it's not like things will become effortless. You still need to work hard. You still need to push hard. You still need to like encourage yourself to use the most of your potential. But really, when we're talking about how do I aim at who I need to become? Well, we need that vision, values, purpose, the whole of that complete. And as we populate it, it's almost like a pointerless painting. You get more data points, and then you can step back from it and go, oh, this is what my life's about. This is what I'm here to do. And then the rest just clarifies.
Okay, that's interesting. So you talked there about one of the points I picked up on was looking at the sort of prescribed life that you have as a child, and I think that's an important one really because we've got this kind of societal norm of you go to school, you then go to college, then you go and get your A levels, then you go to uni, and then you go into your career, and then that's you good for 4 years. I do think it's very difficult then if you are in a career to then go, actually, is this really what I enjoy? What is this what my purpose is? And I think some of the most successful people I know have actually never been to university, never been to college. And I've really recently changed my mind on this whole idea of university. And there's some people that used to go, oh, shouldn't go, shouldn't bother. Other people that would die on the hill going, you need to get the education. And I was one of these people that would be like, yeah, the education is really important. It teaches you not just the academia side, but looking at your social skills and things like that as well. And then as I've gotten a bit older, I've realized actually there's a lot of people doing very well because they've had this idea from the beginning that they didn't want to go to uni, that it was very clear cut, and they didn't want to follow that kind of prescribed path. They wanted to kind of do their own thing, and they've built some very successful businesses, or they're in really good corporate positions now, but they just did it the sort of unconventional way. And I think it's reassuring to know that you don't actually have to go down that prescribed route, and the fact that you've acknowledged that there is a prescribed route for people. I think people kind of get scared of the fact that I don't really want to deviate from what people have said I need to do, and what parents have said I need to do.
Yeah, well, here's the clue about whether you're pointing down the right path or not, whether you're moving in the direction you should be moving, because there's no right or wrong answer to university or not university, or to running a business or a career or married. That's why it's so contentious. Anything contentious is because there is no truth to it. There's different perspectives to different people, and that entirely depends on you and what you are set up to be doing. You should be applying your strength in the best way you can. I should not be a plumber because I'm terrible at it. I tried to sort out our underfloor heating, and it took me forever just to switch my ground source, air source heat pump off and on again, and then it worked after like 2 months. That kind of thing. Like, I shouldn't be doing that, but I'm very good at understanding people, and I'm very good at teaching and coaching and guiding. So we have our authentic version of us. We know in our back of our mind that we want to be. And how do we know whether that's just fantasy or whether it is a true, genuine urge? Well, your emotions. So the conscious mind, the rational bit you call you, processes around 50 to 60 individual bits of information per second. The subconscious, the emotional, the physiological, so basically the more primal parts of our brain and nervous system, processes 14 million bits of information per second. And I can't do the maths. Another job I shouldn't do, mathematician. I can't do the maths to figure out what the difference is there, but it's gigantic. And if we can tune into the informational density of that intuition, of the felt sense, then we can gain some extra perspective. So really, we need to just understand, learn to feel, learn to appreciate our emotions in order to give us a different perspective on the situation.
So our emotions are kind of giving us those cues almost to say you're kind of on the right track, or maybe look at something slightly different.
Yeah, exactly right. So there are 5 core emotions that I think of them as primary emotions, and I can't remember the book that I learned this from originally, but we can put it in the show notes if I remember. But it's not my concept, is all I'm saying. It's someone else's who's done this work, and they basically say there's 5 primary emotions, and this is what I teach my clients too, and it's the easiest way to do it. And there are tons more than 5, but these are the primary ones, and it's the easiest way to learn to get the outcomes that you're looking for. The anger, joy, sadness, fear, and this kind of sexual creativity. And that's not lust. It's more, I want to create, I want to make. And our first step is called emotional literacy. Emotional literacy. And that's just knowing, before we get to emotional intelligence, we need to learn what are the words that we're trying to use. And it's simply being able to say, oh, I'm feeling fear, or I'm feeling anger, or I'm feeling joy. And the reason why is because each of those has a gift that it's trying to give you. It's trying to teach you something. It's kind of obvious, but if I'm feeling anger, it's telling me there's a boundary that needs to be set, or I need to be defensive, I need to stand up for myself, or I need to attack something. Like, think about why we evolved anger. If I'm feeling fear, it means, hey, you idiot, pay attention. You need to look at something you're not doing at right now. So this is where our emotions come in, and rather than resisting our emotions, we need to learn to ultimately appreciate them. To go, hey, it's telling me, like, I feel joy, or maybe I should do a bit more of this thing. I feel sadness. Well, I need to let go of this. I need to allow it to drift. And having that appreciation and that sensitivity to our emotional state gives us more data points. And again, back to that pointerless painting, it's more dots that form ultimately a higher resolution image. Like, we could have the old, if we were speaking to each other, I don't know, 10 years ago, your camera would be rubbish and I wouldn't be able to see. But now you've got high resolution because there's more dots in there. And it's the same thing with our emotions. If we can color that and add detail with the higher resolution image, that's what we can do.
Stop filming on the potato, essentially. And
Exactly.
So with that in mind, then, would it be a useful exercise to, I've recently started taking up a bit more on the journaling side, and I know this gets peddled as well, like, you must journal, but doing it in the right way is really, I found, pretty beneficial to me. Acknowledging as you're going through your day to day where those emotions come in and just making note of it. Would you say that's a good thing to do?
Yeah, absolutely. It's basically, can you generate some awareness over what's happening? Can you catch them in the flow? And the first thing I try and get, or the first exercise that I do with my clients, once I've taught them kind of those five primary emotions, and by the way, every other emotion is like a combination of those or a different intensity of it. So rage is 100% of anger, that kind of thing. The first thing I do with them, the first exercise I get them to do, is simply stop 5 times a day and just go, which of those 5 am I feeling right now? It has to be one of those 5. And it makes you sit there, like, get to know the physiological symptoms of it and go, okay, I didn't realize it, but I'm feeling sadness right now. That's interesting. And that's it. There's no attaching to it. There's no attaching a story to it, but it's kind of like hey, that's interesting.
Yeah, just acknowledging the feeling. I can't remember it was Andrew Shaw had on the podcast, and I don't know if you're familiar with his work at all. You might have seen his videos of he's like normally typing at a computer, and then he kind of turns to face you, and he's an emotional intelligence coach essentially, and we were talking about this idea of dysregulation. So he used that term quite a lot. So being dysregulated, I was going to ask you what that means to you, really, but he was talking more about not just, you're not turning the dial off, you're not trying to push those feelings away. And for a lot of listeners, this is the point where you either lose a lot of listeners or you don't. And the people who are kind of a bit more open-minded, they kind of stay the course. Those who I think tend to, I want to say shy away, because everyone's got their own reasons for doing it, but I feel like this sort of stuff is where you get a big divide in people and go, no, feelings, opinions, I don't like it, I don't want to know. And some that go, actually, I kind of could lean into this a bit more. But he's talking about not just feeling your emotions, but he said, really do feel them. So you're not attaching a story to it. You're just acknowledging how you feel in a specific moment, whether it's, joy, anger, or whatever you said it was. But just having that awareness and going, this is how I feel, and just, that's it. Write it down or move on. Not going, oh, I shouldn't feel like this, or I should feel in a particular way, which I think is quite an easy trap to fall into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell wrote about this story. I can't remember which of his books it was in, but he spoke about this firefighter who burst into a burning room with his team. He's a veteran firefighter. He'd been to, I don't know, 1,000, 10,000, 100, I don't know how many fires. But he got in there. He was very experienced. He's with his team. There was a raging inferno. He came to his kitchen and something felt off. And he ran through his checklists in his mind about, okay, well, I can see this, I can see that, I've run through this, and everything like by that checklist is safe. But there's something that's different. And he felt this kind of dread in his stomach, fear, right? He felt that fear. And he got his team, he got out. As the last guy crossed the threshold, the entire floor collapsed. And if they'd stayed within it, they would have been buried alive and burnt alive. What he did is pay attention to his emotions. And there's a study through the Singapore army that basically assessed how effective leaders were and compared that to their emotional intelligence. It's kind of obvious when you think about it, but the more effective leaders had better emotional intelligence. Now, that's because you can see what's happening in other people and you can see what's happening in yourself. You've got more data points to draw from. I was just coaching this guy before this call who is, I think he's a software engineer. And so he's very analytical. He's very mechanically minded. He's got an amazing gift for many, many things. But this emotional stuff was new to him. And he was just saying, oh, I get it now. It's the resolution. I've got a better resolution image to aim with. I can see more clearly. It's almost like you've got another dimension when you can see your emotions clearly. So it's not just you've got your x-axis, you've got your y-axis, and you can plot your points on the graph more clearly. So it really can be a superpower. The fear is, and I was like this, like as in the military, I had to push through. I had to shut down my emotions for a long time. The fear is that when we learn emotional awareness, that we give into them, and it's completely the opposite. When we learn emotional awareness, we stop being pushed around by emotions. We can see them clearly because no longer am I consumed by anger because I'm not trying to suppress or repress it. I'm allowing it to be there. It burns intensely. The half-life of it is very short, and then it fades away, and I become balanced again. There's fMRI studies that show an emotion will last 60 to 90 seconds, any intensity, if you just pay attention to it and allow it to be there. And Freud said this, over 100 years ago, that as soon as you turn away from your emotions, it becomes very ugly and becomes something else entirely. Our job is to simply see it for what it is. It's nothing more than the physical sensation. Now you can attach all the stories you want to it, but it's nothing more than the physical sensation.
Yeah, massively. Yeah, it's very similar to what we were talking about with Andrew, and in that sense. And yeah, I agree. I think it's important to, the more you push stuff away, the more it just kind of bubbles up. And at least in my experience, I found the same. You know, I'm not an angry person. I've never been a particularly angry person, but I do notice if I try and repress stuff too much, I do end up getting a bit very frustrated. And it's little things that, you know, just really piss me off. It's like little irritations, and they stack up and stack up. So trying to avoid to get to that point is always more beneficial, I think.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about.
Let me jump in quickly because you mentioned dysregulation earlier, and there's a part A to your question. The way I think of dysregulation is you have this window of tolerance, which is how much stress did you talk about window of tolerance with anyone else before?
Not window tolerance. We talked about allostatic load. I don't know if that's a similar principle.
Yeah, there's definitely carryovers between it. So window tolerance is basically how much stress or how much challenge can I handle. And either side of that, you get kind of hyper arousal and hypo arousal. So you get overstimulated, your fight or flight, or you hypo arouse, you down regulate, you're very low, and it can trickle over into that shutdown that I talked about before. Now, what we want to do when we talk about dysregulation, that you're either side of that window of tolerance, you grow by expanding your window of tolerance, by going into those moments. So you have to be dysregulated. Life would be so boring and mundane if you never dysregulated your nervous system. Like, why do you watch scary movies? Why do I go like backcountry skiing or climbing? Because I enjoy being dysregulated. There's a thrill to it. And the way we grow as human beings is we experience things that dysregulate ourselves, and then we learn to regulate our nervous systems. And mothers do this initially for us, ideally, and then we learn to regulate our own nervous systems. So we grow by pushing that boundary and coming back, and then pushing that boundary and coming back. And that's why it's so essential to not only do things that scare us and take risks, but also come back to safety and learn how to regulate yourself and your emotional self.
Okay. I want to talk about goals, and we talked about goals and nested goals before, but there's a point I didn't quite get onto, which was goals as commitment. So if you are committing to a goal, and this is something I've been guilty of before, I think the point at which most people stop is just the point of action. So actually, they could have the plan, they can map out their goals, and then ready to hit go, and they just don't get there because they just don't start. And I've heard it said many, many a time with a lot of different things is if you want to do it, just start. Like, you learn along the way. You don't have to have everything mapped out. But I wanted to take that one step further and just say, for these, if we consider goals as commitments, let's say you wanted to get up earlier in the morning, or you want to hit the gym multiple times a week. What if you keep breaking those commitments to yourself? Let's say you want to get up at, let's coin it, let's say 6 a.m. You want to get up at 6 a.m. because you want to do a bit more stuff in the morning. I want to get up at 6 a.m. and then day one, oh shit, I missed it. I got up at 7:30 a.m. Day two, I did the same thing. I've heard James Clear say you should never miss 2 days in a row of a habit. I think it was James Clear, maybe Chris Williamson, one or two. But I wanted to just understand, what are the dangers if we keep breaking these commitments to ourselves?
Well, you form a story, and your stories dictate who you become. So if I believe I'm the type of person who always wakes up late, I become the type of person that always wakes up late. So we could approach that from a behavioral lens and just say, well, I'm going to set 12 alarms, and one of them is going to be a bloke playing the drums in my bedroom, so I cannot wake up. That's the behavioral way, and it's going to say I'm going to get to bed at a certain time. That's my first discipline. I'm going to enjoy my nice bedtime routine, so I'm excited to do it, and that's part of it. And then we can think about, okay, well, what's really creating that behavior to begin with? And what I'd be looking at there is, what story have you created along with it? What do you actually believe about this? The point that I was originally thinking about, and the reason why I lost my train of thought there, is because there's something I wanted to come back to. And have you heard of the change formula?
I haven't.
Okay, so it's basically C equals brackets D times V close brackets plus FS. And what that means is change, so your ability to change, equals your pain or discomfort times your vision plus your first step. So let's look at that waking up early. You know the first step, you set your alarm clock. You've probably got a semblance of a vision, and sometimes a nice vision is enough to carry you forwards there. You go, oh, okay, I want to be doing this kind of thing. But what's missing there is the discomfort. How can you attach pain to that and make yourself not do it? So you can have this as the social pressure. You can guilt yourself into it. You can sign up to a coach who will force you to do it. You could pay the bloke playing the drums to get you up so you don't have to wait. We're not just motivated by the carrot, we're motivated by the stick. And you have to have those multiplicatory, no, there's some word there. You have to have two factors to multiply together. So you have to have a good vision, some elements of vision, but most often it's not the pain. So how can we force that pain? Tim Ferriss has this great idea in his, I think it's 4-Hour Work Week, where he talks about, if you don't meet the goal that you set for yourself, you have to give some sort of financial deposit to a political cause that you really don't agree with. And that's enough of a motivational factor, because you not only lose the money, but there's a social thing, and just there's guilt in there as well. So you need to find something that really creates pain if you don't do it.
It's interesting you say pain and discomfort, because this is actually where I was going into next. We've heard of this idea of leaning into discomfort, and it crops up time and time again. Jay Alderton says, get comfortable being. If you do hard things, you'll have an easy life, and if you do easy things, you'll have a hard life. And Ross Edgley, he's said the same sort of thing. You get comfortable being uncomfortable, and that's a good thing to do. Other people have, Andrew Shaw was one as well. That little bit of discomfort is good for you. He said if there's things that tend to be painful, they tend to have obviously I'll caveat by saying you don't just go and do the most painful thing you can without any benefit, but learn about this idea of the anterior cingulate cortex. I think it was through I think it was human, actually.
Huberman, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a human kind of thing, isn't it? So part of the brain where you can almost train your willpower. So by doing things that you don't want to do, let's take the very classic example of like a cold shower or something like that. Doing something you really don't want to do and doing it anyways, you can build that willpower muscle. You can almost train your brain and grow that sort of ACC or MCC, whatever it was. And I like this idea of discomfort and leaning into discomfort, but it's one of those things where there's like a fear barrier, I think, between getting to the point of discomfort and actually thinking about doing it. So when I talked before about that breaking that commitment, it's like, okay, I want to get into this I'm going to do this cold shower in the morning, and then you get to it and it's like, oh, it's a bit cold outside. I really don't want to do that. And when I look at other people in the world, there are people that have had the deck massively stacked against them, and they've gone on to achieve these amazing things. Yourself, I know you've got a personal story, which you've had some hard times as well, and then you've leaned into the discomfort of the commando training, for example. I guess it's every time I don't do something like that, I feel a bit guilty, and then I think that guilt just adds the pressure on that story. We're going back to that story. I feel like I've let myself down when I go, I'm breaking this commitment. I'm not leaning into that discomfort, and I feel like I'm missing out on stuff. So this idea of discomfort, I just want to get to my point. How do we better lean into this idea of discomfort, doing uncomfortable things?
Yeah, beautiful question. And once again, there'll be how many of your listeners going, yeah, that's me. I've been rewriting the story and I just can't change it because it's too much. So number one, let's go back to that change formula. Can we improve the vision? So basically that nested goal side of things. Can we get clear on why this is important to you? So attaching whys to things is really important. Like one singular powerful why or multiple individual whys, we can have that. And then we can increase the pain too. Now, the mistake most people make is that it's too big a leap instantly. They've got too much ego to appreciate where they actually are now. And I say this understanding myself. Like when you say, like, you hold up one of these patches of Royal Marine Commando and you've got the green beret wherever it is around my house, and like you've got these things that is reminders, and you see these people who are doing like incredible things, and not myself, but like you look out and you see Ross Edgley or you see Goggins, like the freaks, I should be doing that every single day. And realistically, I don't think anyone would want to be in Goggins' head. So that's something to consider. But also, let's have the humility to admit where you are now. Now, some people will sabotage themselves consistently by, let's say, I'm going to increase my business's revenue by 10 times over the next month. Well, why don't we just focus on adding 10% first? Let's aim small. Let's be humble in this. And through doing that, you build an undeniable stack of proof that you can grow. It's about doing things simply. It's about consistently growing. And there's a glamour and there's an intensity to it. And there's ultimately a self-dooming that we perform when we set these huge goals. Let's get simple. Let's focus on the most essential thing. What's the one thing that you can change that's going to have the greatest impact to the quality of your life? And that's really key. That word quality is not about improving every metric. It's about getting clear on the one thing that will improve your life most. So the biggest thing that I do when I start working with clients is kill about 90% of their goals. We say, which one thing, if improved, will make all your other goals easier or irrelevant? So that could look, for most people, it's genuinely improving their business output or their career or earning a bit more money because it gives them the freedom to do certain things. And that helps them massively. For other people, it's working a bit less. There's variations in this, but what one thing can we do that improves things? And then if we link back to how do we approach discomfort, then your discomfort has got a goal to it. And you're not just doing cold ice baths because everyone else is doing it or you feel like you should be. You're not doing it to conform to someone else's norm. You're doing it because each of those steps is a tiny vote towards the type of person you want to become. And that's where it comes down to that character skill training I talked about before. So we can identify the type of person you want to become. Maybe for you, that's more disciplined, or maybe for you, that's more committed to your goals, or something like that. There's a character skill that you're trying to become. And now you can say, when you're facing that shower and you go, this is a vote for the type of person that I want to become. This action now is me becoming this person. I know that by doing this, I get one step closer. And then you see the tiny impact that has on your ultimate outcome. You see, maybe the business revenue doesn't go by 10%, but it does by 2%. You're like, oh, that had an impact, so I can do more of that. And when we simplify our life rather than trying to do all the things at once, we set ourselves up for success.
Proving it with the small wins, as I say. I think there's this glorification of the discomfort as well. That we talk about Goggins. He's a classic example, and you hit the nail on the head where you wouldn't want to be in his head, because he is just so reliant on, obviously not knowing him, and not just from what I've read about him. He's reliant on that kind of just going to those dark places and just powering through. I think Ross, on the other hand, is kind of, I was listening to him the other day on the Without Limits with Marshall, actually, and he was talking about gratitude being his main kind of thing. So it's a complete juxtaposition to what Goggins is. But again, it's one of these people, I think it's one of the best things and worst things about these kind of characters we see. He's so inspirational, both of them are in their own right, but you see him all the time, so you think that is the bar and I have to get there. But it is, the bar is so much lower for yourself. You need to kind of bring it back down. I think that's a great way of phrasing it. You need to just look at those kind of very small incremental wins and then building it, that stack of proof you said, that, was that Hormozy who said that? Stack of undeniable proof?
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people have said it. I think I've heard it come out of his mouth.
So building that stack of undeniable proof of, you are who you say you are, I think is what he was saying. So, and I think that's something I've tried to look back on as well and go, actually, even if I'm not quite where I want to be yet, sometimes it just takes a moment to reflect on actually what you have achieved. And, when I look at imposter syndrome, I default to that quote a lot by going, well, here's all the stack of evidence for me that says, you think I can't do this, but actually here's every time documented where I've shown in the past that I can do it. And I think it's just building that layer by layer, layers of paint, as I say, just building that individual.
When you meditate enough, you realize that the past is nothing but a story you're telling yourself, and the future is nothing but the story you're telling yourself. But this moment right now, not 5 minutes from now, but this moment right here, right now, you have almost total control over how you behave. And if you can default to being conscious rather than unconscious, you can create the outcomes that you want by simply being who you need to be in that moment. So it's really can you keep yourself on the edge of the rut and not falling into the rut of unconsciousness? Can you climb out over and over and over again into that conscious reality?
Is there something to be said for being overly conscious? I think Chris Williamson coined it the curse of the deep thinker, where you have, you and I are very much on the same sort of level, and that we've clearly watched the same sort of thing, absorbed the same sort of content. So I can imagine we've got similarities in what we do. But there's also things for me where I'm like, well, I know what I should be doing. I know exactly how I need to get there. And if I'm not doing it, that's almost like that is go back to that guilt again, that kind of reassurance that it's just adding to that story where I'm not doing that. I'm not being that person I want to be, even though I know exactly how to get from point A to point B. Do you think there is such thing as like that, the curse of the deep thinker?
Yeah, I love Chris, but he's not the first person to think this. There's so many studies that show self-reflection is a gift and a curse. Now, there's a golden ratio, which is a 1-to-1 action to self-reflection. And that's what we want. And a few years ago, I actually posted about it this morning, weirdly. But a few years ago, I worked with a therapist. I was seeking my next edge. And honestly, there are a few things that I was struggling with. And I was like, okay, can this person help me? And honestly, she was brilliant. I came away from all of these sessions thinking, I've got this thing that I understand about myself. Oh, that makes sense. And it's like all these blocks like tumbling into position. And like it was intellectually stimulating. It was emotionally very difficult. And I was loving the process. And I looked at all the metrics that mattered to me in my life about 4 months into it and thought nothing has changed. It was just navel gazing and mental masturbation. It wasn't action. So when this is the difference between a coach and a therapist. And the therapists are very important for a lot of people, but they're not coaches, because coaches work with a narrow band of people to get a specific outcome. And so a sprinting coach gets that job, like gets the job done. And I coach people to improve the quality of their lives through mastering themselves and their business. Like it's very specific. A coach is there to get a specific outcome. And that's because it's changing the actions and the behaviors associated with it. A therapist is there so you understand, so you can find your own solutions. A coach says, here are the answers. This is how you grow.
Awesome. Tom Foxley, thank you very much, man. That's really insightful. There's definitely things that I've picked up on throughout the conversation, which I'm gonna, have a look at, and just kind of peeling back the layers of it and not aiming so high. I think the sort of 1%. I think it was who was it that said 1% better every day. I love a good quote, but it is very true. You don't have to, you don't have to change the world overnight. It's just building those layers and kind of starting to change that narrative. So yeah, thank you, man. Really appreciate the conversation.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
So if anyone wants to find out more about what you do, your coaching side of things, social media, let us know where can they go.
Yeah, 3 places really. It depends what works best for you. First one, my podcast. I just released it's a daily 3-ish minute podcast. The podcast itself is called The Freedom Project, but there's a sub-series within that. It's called The Mental Edge. And you'll see Mental Edge number 1, 2, 3, 3 to 5 minutes every single day with something actionable at the end so you can master that day. It's like a shot of espresso for your soul. That's the idea behind it. So subscribe to that. Hit my website up, tomfoxley.me, foxley.me. And then the easiest way, and I love it when people do this because it makes it way more human when I do a podcast, is to head to my Instagram, which is just Tom Foxley, Foxley. Shoot me a message. Let me know if you enjoyed the show. Let me know what your biggest takeaway was. And I like to have conversations with people because otherwise it can be like we're in a vacuum and you listen to podcasts like this and you think, oh, well, that's someone who's doing their own life and they're not having kind of real conversations with people like me. I like to have conversations with people like you. So reach out to me there.
Nice one, Tom. Appreciate it, man. Thank you.